Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today, once again, I'm joined by Colin Watt for the ACSOM Bulletin. Welcome back, Colin. How are you?
I'm doing really good, Paul. How are you?
I'm tremendous, as always. I'm great. Just ready to talk about Celtic again. Your day to come into the Celtic State of Mind Bulletin's a Wednesday.
Yep, Wednesday
We'll be
wonder.
seeing you every Wednesday at 12:30. So thanks everybody for tuning in to the Celtic State of Mind Bulletin. You'll be watching on Periscope / Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and you can get your comments in, make your suggestions, throw your grenades, do everything that you need to do, and Colin and I will discuss all these matters. There's quite a few matters to discuss today. Obviously, there will be fans coming back into football stadiums this weekend, Colin. We had a hint that it would have happened previously. It was a Motherwell game, wasn't it? We thought we were going to get about 700 fans in to the Motherwell game. Ross County at the weekend. Let's open it up, talk about the fans getting back in the stadium, and also talk about the actual game itself, how you see us lining up, how you see the game going.
So it's an interesting one. Certainly it's a great thing now that fans are starting to make their way back into the stadium, although I don't believe there'll be many away fans, if any, allowed in. I did see Paul the Tim put a tweet out yesterday where he's superimposed himself into a Ross County shirt.
Good on him.
That's a great idea, and if it wasn't for the 4.5, maybe 5 hour journey up to Dingwall, I'd maybe try it myself. But no, it's fantastic. I seen Dave Cormack, the Aberdeen chairman, posted an update to his fans the other day, basically saying he expected 300 in this weekend, and the following weekend they're hoping for about 750 for their next match. If that's the case and that's the way it's going to continue to go, then fantastic. Unfortunately, it does look as though whilst these sort of lockdown restrictions are in most of the West Coast, they'll not let this go ahead. That's the reason why the two games that have got the go ahead are up in the North East, with Aberdeen and Ross County. I don't really understand the reasoning behind that, to be perfectly honest. It looks as if you can still go to the pub and meet up with your pals and watch the game, but you can't actually go to an outdoor stadium. But that's an argument for another day.
Could have it today if you want.
Well, if people want to bring that up and throw their suggestions in there, yeah, definitely. What I'm really interested about this game on Saturday is that it's not on Sky. It's on Ross County's pay-per-view. I think it's the first time in a long time that Scottish football's been part of pay-per-view. I remember actually one of the first pay-per-view football matches I seen was when Celtic lifted the trophy for the first time under Martin O'Neill, and Tommy Johnson scored the goal against St Mirren. That was actually a pay-per-view game, but it was Sky that hosted that pay-per-view. This time it's Ross County holding it. And the question I would throw out to the listeners and the viewers is, do you really think that they'll be able to, one, cope with the demand? I mean, we're talking this could be, who knows how many people is going to try and buy this pay-per-view? And two, is it worth paying £15 for it?
Well, we'll be paying 15 quid for it, Colin. That's for sure.
Yep.
I think it does open a lot of debate. First and foremost, and I've said this a few times on the podcast over the last few weeks, we're sometimes quite critical of Scottish clubs for their inability to not cash in but maximise their ability to earn money through the game and you know, have different approaches to getting fans in the stadiums, etc. This week we heard about the news that Mark Miller had been involved in a groundbreaking new venture in relation to putting cameras into various stadiums around the lower reaches of Scottish football. He's a Coatbridge native. He's a Celtic fan.
Yep.
And he clarified last night that you can be a Celtic and an Albion Rovers fan, so that's fine. But when I heard that story, I thought, brilliant, well done, Mark Miller. He's a guy who I'm a big fan of anyway. I must admit, I'm a big fan. And the graphic novels and that he's been involved in have been absolutely breathtaking. They're superb. So Mark Miller's a guy that, he's welcome to come in here and talk to us about Marvel superheroes and installing cameras at Cliftonville anytime he wants. But I think that is a forward-thinking move by the clubs who are involved. I think 22 clubs are involved in that. And interesting enough, without knowing the story about what Mark Miller had been planning, we did have a wee chat with Victoria McNulty at the beginning of the week, talking about this whole virtual season ticket situation, where I asked Kevin Graham the question, would you buy a St. Pauli virtual season ticket and pay them 50 quid a month, a year? Because it's a club that, I've been out there once myself, but if I got offered a virtual season ticket for 50 quid, I'd buy that. I'd watch every single game online. Without question, I would do that. And you're investing in a club that you've got an interest in or you're passionate about. And, with the pandemic and the lockdown and everything else, Colin, people have been thinking on their feet. That's the only reason we started up a live broadcast. So everybody's adapted to the situation. And I think that, football clubs looking at different ways to generate cash and interest and increase the brand's awareness. I'm all for it. People might criticise Ross County for cashing in. I think good on you. There's very few opportunities for Scottish clubs outside the obvious to make some serious cash. So if Ross County are going to cash in, fair play, we're going to pay the 15 quid. We're going to cover the game this weekend. And my big concern would be, is it going to be on, would you call it a server that's going to be able to deal with the demand? That's probably the biggest issue. We've seen, a massive organisation like Celtic struggling with demand. The season tickets have dropped out, the streaming's frozen, it's gone slow. I'm not using this as a means of criticising the club, because, we've chucked things together to put the product out. Is it going to meet the demand? I hope it does. Yeah, I mean, that'll be the biggest worry, I'd imagine, going around Dingwall at the moment. How can you test something like that? It's not as if they have like 50,000 people tuning in to watch a Ross County game every week. This is a one-off. They'll know the importance of this. And knowing the chairman that's up there, Roy McGregor, he is a very astute businessman, and he will know about the impact of the finance on his budget that this one game can bring him. I mean, when he saw that Sky weren't going to be covering the game because, let's be honest, Sky aren't covering the game because it is the English football's back. We are getting put down as a secondary league now that the English football's back. I seen yesterday that basically they're going to be covering every game live until fans are back in the stadium across Sky, BT, Amazon, BBC, and we'll speak about that in a minute. But Roy McGregor must have looked at that and rubbed his hands and went, just think of the money that's going to come in from that, because we have been able to introduce this pay-per-view system, which is a great thing across the league. But he would have looked at it and went, well, we're not going to get 3,000 Celtic fans coming to the game, but guess what? We might get 10 or 15 or 20,000 that are going to pay £15 for a pay-per-view. That's more than what they'd have got if Celtic had actually made the trip up to Dingwall. So they're thinking, and this is a cliche, out the box, they're thinking in new ways to make money. Oh, definitely. And I've got to applaud that. And I mean, I don't think it's capitalism for a club who are going to be struggling and to, after the pandemic, to look at other ways to generate cash. We spoke about a friend of the podcast, Saul Davis, setting up a platform for bands and entertainers and comedians and spoken word artists to go on his platform and basically perform worldwide. And it begged the question, be your favourite band, anything from U2 to Coldplay, boo and hiss at the back there when I mentioned Coldplay. But, not from me. Not from you. Oh, well, there you go. You're the only one in the studio that likes them. But these big bands that launch a world tour, let's say. Yep. I mean, if Oasis were to come back, right, they'll launch a world tour. Every day it sells out. And you might be a punter in Dumbarton or Methil or wherever you might live. And you might think, well, I'm going to buy a season ticket to that world tour and watch every gig. Or you might buy a gig on a Thursday night when they're playing in Paris and you're watching it from the comfort of your own home with this platform. So the way that these companies and these platforms are developing are obviously as a reaction to the pandemic, but there's a lot of that we can carry forward after the pandemic once we hopefully get over the restrictions. And I think football needs to look at that as well. The problem that Celtic will have in that scenario, because obviously we've got the worldwide fan base, we've got Celtic TV, which is screening the home games on a worldwide basis. With regards to that, you pay quite a small subscription fee for that.
It's £60 a year or something like
that, so in effect, are you buying a virtual season ticket for £60 a year if you live in the States or Australia?
That's the way it kind of comes
same
across,
idea. So some of these smaller clubs, or cult clubs, because that's what St. Pauli were, because obviously they've been commercialised to a great degree since the lunatics took over the asylum, as it were. But some of these clubs could certainly generate a lot of cash just by getting that interest. Would you buy a St. Pauli virtual season ticket for £50?
Probably not, but I don't probably have the same affiliation with St. Pauli as a lot of Celtic fans do. I mean, what we're talking about here, though, and by the way, it's not that I don't like St. Pauli. I think St. Pauli as a club is to be praised for their approaches to football, and their fans are second to none. It's just I don't really follow the games. What is kind of interesting though is you kind of speak about a virtual season ticket and paying £50 a year to watch this club. See, as a football fan, I find myself as just a general football fan. I mean, I love Celtic. I'm a Celtic diehard, right? Celtic is my number one club. But I'll maybe want to go and watch maybe Liverpool play Brighton, and then at night time maybe it's the MLS and it's Philadelphia Union versus
so
Atlanta
you watch
United.
Anything, you consume football.
I would just consume football,
right?
So for me, as a TV package, you're looking at having to have Sky Sports, BT Sports, as it stands now, Amazon Prime, and then it wasn't that long ago where there was new contenders coming into the market. 11 Sports picked up La Liga and Serie A. You've got to pay for extra subscription services for other leagues across Europe.
Let me reshape the question then about the St. Pauli thing, because that's obviously pigeonholing you into a very small area. Is there a league that you would buy a package for? Is there a specific league? Because I remember the buzz back in the day when Channel 4 got Italian football and we all became massive Italian football fans, and it was great fun, to be fair, but obviously it was different back then. They had the broadcasting rights and they had various support packages that you could watch, highlight packages and all that kind of stuff. Would you buy into that? Because as you say, Amazon Prime, Netflix, they're all getting involved in that on-demand viewing that we're all becoming accustomed to now, aren't we?
Well, there's the thing, right? So, for example, if you were asking about a league, I'd say probably the best league to watch in the world at the minute is the Bundesliga.
Right.
I think the Bundesliga has incredible players out there. You see it year after year where these players make the moves to so-called bigger teams. They're not bigger teams, they just offer more money. The Bundesliga has an abundance of talent out there, and they add to it every year. I mean, look at the way they've treated the likes of Jadon Sancho when he came over, signed them for next to nothing from Man City. They're signing these guys from Celtic and things like that. There is a platform there. You look at the Bayern Munich side that just went on and won the Champions League there. They sign guys like Gnabry for 6-7 million from Arsenal. They're not spending lots of money, but they're letting these players develop, and it's becoming a fantastic league. But the issue, as we've already said, is, are we actually going to be pricing fans out of watching football? I mean, you're talking it's what, £40 for a Sky Sports subscription, £25 for BT, £60 a year for Amazon Prime. As more and more of these go on, what happens to, as you said, when we were growing up, Channel 4, a free-to-air channel, had Italian football. That's how we discovered it.
It is how we discovered it, you're right. And then obviously the brand awareness for specific clubs that you might take a liking to increases. I mean, you used to go into the local sports shops and they were all selling Italian football shirts, for various teams from Sampdoria to Inter Milan. Don't know if they still do. I'm very rarely in a sports shop, as you can probably tell. No very sporty. I didn't wear sneakers and all that kind of stuff. But
probably Greaves is probably the only one still going.
Never been in it in my life, but the point was it increased the awareness, the brand awareness of Italian football as a product, and then these individual clubs. Talking to Saul Davis now, Saul had some fantastic ideas because he wasn't thinking like a normal football punter would think, because he's out the game, if you like. He's maybe, although he does live near to Ross County Stadium, it might be his platform they're putting it on. I don't know. Yeah, I never asked. It's
got a ticket
potential.
For Saturday?
It's potential.
Does he have a +1?
He was speaking to Ross County. about various different things, because he says to me, would there ever be a situation where you look at a club, I used Dunfermline as an example because I know a wee bit about them, is there ever an opportunity when you look at a club like Dunfermline who may sell, let's say, 4,000 season tickets, 45,000 season tickets, and you look at the revenue that generates, could you generate that revenue elsewhere by having a forward-thinking platform where you're actually putting the footage out elsewhere? And then on the back of that, Mark Miller launches this. So people are thinking along those lines. Is it free to air? Are people paying an amount just to access it on a match-by-match basis? Do you buy a virtual season ticket? These are things that 6 months ago we wouldn't even be considering.
I mean, for me, I think the ideal platform is using something like what Mark Miller is doing. So if you've got the rights to, say, 22 clubs, get them all on the one platform. If you look at like Netflix, Amazon Prime, even going out there, there's loads of different apps that's out there where you subscribe to the one service and it's all there. Now, if you've got the 22 teams, if there's 4 or 5 live games going on at a time and you've got the subscription service that, I don't know what the price point would be, but for Amazon and Netflix it's like £10 a month. If you can log in there and you see there's the highlights of Morton versus Inverness Cali, and whilst you're there, there's a live game between Alloa and Dunfermline, it's a way to get it out to an audience that wouldn't look at it before. Right, now you've already said that you're one of these guys that if you were flicking through the channels in the Hungarian 4th Division, women's football were playing, you'd watch it. I don't. I've got to admit, I don't. I've got a very specific interest, and that interest is in Celtic. I don't watch the English football. I just don't watch it. I used to watch or have an interest in English football back in the day when it was real. Back in the 80s. Now I'm sounding like the old Celtic dad again. And you used to buy Shoot and Match, but you knew everything about the English teams. You knew every player in the Panini sticker album. Now I've lost interest in English football. That's just a personal thing, right? But what I'm going to ask you, you mentioned, let's say the fixture Morton against Inverness Cali Thistle. Who, outside of the very small bubble in Scotland, is going to be interested in that fixture? I think there's probably a market out there for expats. I know personally, my girlfriend's uncle stays in Canada. Big Morton fan. Anytime he's over, gets a Morton strip, takes it home. Where in Canada? Where does he reside? Do you know? Toronto, just outside Toronto. Right. There'll be a network of people like that out there. I mean, all you have to do is look at the fact that we've now sold the rights to Scottish football to ESPN over in America. So there is expats all around the world that maybe only get the chance to watch Celtic Rangers games because that's all that's shown around the world. I get the Celtic thing. And I do get the big two. I do get that because you can sell that anywhere, in any region. But I'm talking about the lower reaches of Scottish football. I remember being out working in Saudi Arabia, and I actually got the chance to watch on BN Sports, a fantastic platform for sports across the world, right? Ali Beg worked there, didn't he? Yeah, he did, yeah. And they actually showed the cup final between St Mirren and, was it Hearts, when St Mirren won the League Cup? Yeah, Danny was in last week. Talking about giving Bairns the belt. They showed that live. Right. Now, where else are you going to get to see something like that? But that's a cup final. That's a cup final, I'm not concerned. I'm not an investor, but my question would be, who is going to tap in to the Scottish second or third tier outside of Scotland? I think the numbers would be slim. Then I can throw in another point we've spoken about. You put a Celtic Colts team into the mix, then it's a sellable product. Could be. That could be the case. But anything with green and white hoops under the banner of Celtic, even if it's a reserve team, then that product becomes a sellable entity. So are they looking at it with a view to maybe having a Celtic or a Rangers Colts team within the pyramid? I don't know. I mean, it would be a great addition to Scottish football having Colt teams. Now, we have to be very specific what we mean about Colt teams. We're not talking about throwing a Celtic B team out there where you would have the guys that don't make the first 11 on a Saturday basically playing every week. Because what we're speaking about here... Is Raymond McStay still playing for the reserves? I don't know. But we're talking about... I think he played about 400 games. Probably a record. We're talking about throwing guys out there for youth development purposes. Yes. We're not... So it's still like an under-21 team, isn't it? Yeah, we're not talking about throwing guys like Tommy Rodgick in every week. We're talking about if he's coming back from fitness and he plays the odd 45 minutes here and there, that's fine.
There'll probably be a rule, maybe 2 or 3 overage players, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about having a full team with the likes of Scott Bain in goal, Patrick Kamala up front, guys like that. We're not talking about that.
Kundai Benyu.
Oh, I actually was shocked to find out he's still at Celtic.
No, I'm not having it.
He's on trial down south somewhere, but he's still a Celtic player.
I'm not having that.
Incredible.
Until when?
I think it's one of these never-ending contracts. He wakes up and it's a rolling 12 months.
Deary me, Kundai Benyu. Can you see him at the recreation park next year? Who knows? I think the Colts has to happen. We're too far down the line, Colin, with the reserve league being away. The infrastructure to set that up, the cost implications for a lot of the clubs who won't be able to afford it, makes that an impossible situation. So the Colts team is the only other idea. Who could put a Colts team together? Probably Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts, Dundee United. Do you think?
I'd say so.
But you've also got to look at the bankability of that as well. So if that Colts team is going to be in the league, yeah, it's good for development, but it's also got to improve things like attendances. So if Celtic Colts were playing at Recreation Park, you're going to get a bigger attendance than normal, particularly if you've got a 3 overage player scenario, and you might be going to watch, let's say, to use your example or someone else's examples, Tommy Roderick. Would I go to the Rex? 100%. I'd go to watch Tommy Roderick there. Would you not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this used to be the thing, and it was like pre-season or it was mid-season, and it was a Celtic 11 would turn up to play games. You knew it wasn't going to be the first team.
Firhill, remember? Firhill. Wanyama was on the bench.
Yeah, we'd play. I mean, I think, was it last season? We played. Oh, I can't remember who we played. But there was the big thing about, was Ross McCormick on trial with us at the time?
Oh, I remember that. Was it Capello or?
It wasn't Morton, no. But I think it was. It might have been like a Lowland League team or something we played. But when these teams come into town, especially when it's fans that don't get the chance to travel to Celtic Park or to Ibrox to see the team week in and week out, then it is something that draws a crowd. In the same way that when we have these Legends games, which I know you've been part of, when these Legends games come around...
That's only because the Celtic State of Mind sponsors the team. I just like to put that in there.
Oh, but
nothing to do with ability.
You told me you got a touch like Pirlo, and anyways... When these Legends
the video
games,
doesn't lie, Colin.
When these Legends games come into town, you see a crowd turn up for them because they don't see Celtic and Rangers every week. Okay, you see them on TV, but when they turn up and they play at a local park, or they play at a local stadium, it will draw a crowd. So
we took the Celtic greats, and I used that old Billy Connolly inverted commas thing, right? We took the Celtic greats to Oakley United.
Yep.
When was the last time we seen Celtic at Oakley? There was a friendly stroke testimonial game. I think it's on the wiki way back, 1980s. And I think a young Peter Grant, Paul McGugan, Owen Archdeacon, and they were all playing. So there's a huge Celtic contingent and a huge Rangers contingent amongst the West Five villages. So that Celtic greats team went out there. Players like Tom Boyd were playing, Brian McClare was playing that day, and various others. And it drew a crowd because a lot of these people don't get the opportunity to watch Celtic, right, other than on the TV. So it is almost like taking that around all these different areas that don't tend to see Celtic, either first teamers or guys who are just bubbling underneath the surface. The Colts idea has got to happen. I thought it was very interesting to get the insight from Graham Diamond and Danny Lennon, because they gave us a wee bit more information than I think has been released to the wider public in relation to these discussions being ongoing. They're very positive. A club like Clyde are welcoming the Colts team into the league pyramid system. And so they should. When you look at it, I mean, take a look at what happened when Rangers started again in Division 3. They were bringing crowds that you would never see at the likes of Clyde or, I'm trying to think, still in Albion. Brechin with the hedge, and we'll go into Brechin in a minute because wee Sid's just been named as the assistant manager. But if you can do that with a team that's only just been reborn, surely you can do that with a Colts team. You be reborn? Well, can you be reborn? Reincarnated, yeah. Aye. Resurrected from the dead. Right. That's another podcast. We all know it's a new club. So what I would like to say, a couple of things on a more serious note before we speak about wee Sid, a friend of Celtic State of Mind. Now, you might have heard us talking a few times about Kane McGinley. Yes. Kane McGinley was a young, lifelong Celtic supporter from Pennycook. And we bumped into Kane when we were over in Romania. And he was a great guy, brilliant guy. We had a wee bit of common ground because I stayed in Pennycook for a period in my youth with my dad's work, moving back and forward from place to place. Pennycook, Abu Dhabi, Norway, France, wherever work took him. Anyway, I knew Pennycook. He was a great wee guy, brilliant, life and soul. And he made a really positive impression on everybody who was in our party at that time. We were really saddened to hear that he tragically lost his life earlier this year, and it was his birthday yesterday. So a big shout out to Kane, his family, his friends, and the wider Celtic family who might have known him, because he was a great wee guy, and it was a tragic event that he lost his life. So all the best to Kane. You'll never walk alone. I know that will resonate with all his friends. The other one, obviously, we had Des McElroy in here.
Yep.
And Des came in with Aaron to speak about his 4th battle against cancer. He's got the battle of his life to get through this, and Aaron's raising some cash to try and pay for treatments that might assist Des on his way. He's well known. He's a well-known Celtic supporter. Check Aaron's Twitter and Facebook out, because she's doing a lot of fundraising, and I know that Mikey Mikovic, a good pal of ours, gave a signed Danny McGrain jersey that's going to be raffled off and that. So
fantastic. Keep
Des in your thoughts and in your prayers, and if you can throw in a few quid to help with the fundraiser, please do so. The other one is another friend of the show, Liam McGrandles. Liam's brilliant. If you've never heard the podcast we done with Liam, it was a very early acoustic session we did back in the day when we used to record in Stirling. And I still listen to it today. I mean, the Johnny Thompson song, the rendition's unbelievable. Hairs in the back of your neck stuff, Colin. Well, Liam is currently number 24 on the iTunes download chart with his latest release, The Place You Call Home. He pointed out today that he's one position below Harry Styles. So please support Liam McGrandles, download his tune and get him to leapfrog Harry Styles, because he wasn't the One Direction guy that was a Celtic fan, I don't think.
No.
And his murder.
He wasn't the one that turned up at Celtic Park and spewed at the side of the park.
That wasn't him. I can't remember who it was. Louis? Liam? Steve? Who knows? But Liam McGrandles is the guy that you should be downloading his track and let him rise in the charts. There's loads of great comments coming through, and we will go through as many as we possibly can in relation to fans getting back into the grounds. But you mentioned some of the lower league teams, and we spoke about Brecon City.
Yep.
I seen with interest yesterday that Simon Donnelly is now the assistant manager alongside Mark Wilson at Brecon, so it's good to see Sid back in the game.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's got a lot to offer, and I'm sure Mark Wilson will be one of the first to admit that he could be doing with as many hands as possible down there at Brecon, because they're a team that certainly needs to turn themselves around after the last few seasons, and Mark's been doing a great job. But having someone with the experience of Sid there can only be a good thing. And when you're part of that dressing room and you look at the guys that are coaching you and the guys that are managing you, to have someone like Simon Donnelly and to have Mark Wilson in the dressing room, that should be encouragement enough to try and look at the position that they're in and turn that around. And I hope they have a great season. I know it's going to be a shorter season, so they really need to get a bit of a kickstart going, and to breaking into the hedge. All the best for the season ahead. Yeah, definitely. Now, we have had Simon and Mark on the podcast at various times over the last few years, and I remember when Mark Wilson appeared on the podcast, Colin, there was a wee bit of backlash from some Celtic fans who, Mark's on that naughty step alongside various other ex-players. And I think it's partly to do with punditry, and it's partly to do with an incident that happened at Ashton Lane, which obviously went to court. So I'm not going to comment on it, and because obviously the truth will out, as they say. But I found him a decent gentleman, a guy who obviously was part of 9 in a row. He was part of that first season. First captain. He's a proper Celtic supporter, and some of the other guys who are on that aforementioned naughty step are also Celtic fans, but sometimes it's difficult to realise that when they're coming out with various things. But, I do wish we Sid all the best, because I think when you look at what he did with Jackie,
that team, it's been kind of tarnished a wee bit because of the Dundee United saga, whereby Jackie and Sid were thrown under a bus. Absolutely thrown under a bus by the powers that be at Dundee United at that time, who made it public. And when you look at the backlash from Dundee United fans, that, you know, talking about Simon and Jackie's time at the club, you wonder if they're actually looking at a lot of the facts. I mean, look at the players that Jackie and Sid brought to Dundee United or developed at Dundee United. Look at the money that the club made as a result of that development. And they keep going on about, but you had a cut of this deal and you had a cut of that deal. Show me a manager that doesn't. If you buy a player or you discover a player like Andy Robertson kicking a ball for Queen's Park whilst working part-time for Marks and Spencer, and you bring him in and he develops under your tutelage and he's sold on to Hull City, maybe with a sell-on, etc., and we know what he went on to achieve, then within your contract it may be that you get a cut of a profit you've made for the club. Why was that such a big deal at the time?
I don't really know. I think Dundee United fans probably now look back on it and go, it was one of the more successful periods that they had, especially considering the things that they've went through in recent times, and to bring that calibre of player to the club is, if you brought that kind of player now, it would be a success. Look at Shankland. I mean, they brought Shankland through. Who's to say that maybe there's not a sell-on fee there that goes to an agent? If Jackie and Sid were the guys that actually went out there, did the research, brought the player in, and they've turned a profit for a club that was really struggling at the time financially, then so be it. And there's something else as well. It's just, we spoke about a boot room mentality, and you were mentioning the other day about developing strikers and bringing strikers through.
Yeah, yep.
Simon Donnelly was the name that was brought up as one of the very few that's made it over the last 20, 30 years. So to have a guy like that who knows how to come through, to not have him involved in Scottish football was probably one of the worst things we could have done. Do you know what I mean? Like, having him now back, okay, it's at Brecon. For the younger players coming through there, that's a guy that made it through the Celtic side. And
he was part of the squad in the World Cup finals, 1998.
Exactly. So if you're a young player, you're going to want to listen to what he's got to say and bring it into your own game. So,
and he's got a track record in coaching and management, Colin. You know, Partick Thistle, success story. Dundee United, largely, if you were to look at the entire story, the whole period, it was a success story. I think it was a huge mistake to go down to York City from Jackie and Sid, and it's not just with hindsight, it was an obscure move at the time. And, you know, there was probably a period where I thought they won't get back in the game, but various times on the podcast I've mentioned that Jackie and Sid were a big loss to the Scottish game. The other one that I've met and through listening to his insight that I feel was a huge loss to the Scottish game is Brian McClare. I think Brian McClare, some of the concepts he has, talking about colt teams and developing youngsters, and unbelievable. That's why he didn't last at the SFA, because he had a bit of foresight and a bit of sense.
It's a problem with Scottish football. If you take a look at that most recent Scotland squad, our striker was an Australian, and who else was there?
You're talking about Dykesy?
Yep. Centre-backs. Centre-backs were still probably relying on Charlie Mulgrew to be our best centre-back. It
goes back to the argument about Celtic developing goal-scoring strikers. It's obviously a problem across the board. When, you know, big Lyndon Dykes, who I think's done remarkably well to go from Queen of the South to Livingston to Queen's Park Rangers, and I wish him all the best down there. I think he's got the physical attributes that might make him a success down there.
Oh, definitely. I mean, he suits that league. When you look at the guys that score goals down in that league, the guys that maybe never made it up here in Scotland as well, I'm thinking of guys like Joey Gardner and Waghorn that Rangers signed, guys that like Jordan Rhodes, who
I still like him.
He's scored a lot of goals. Stephen Fletcher got 18 goals for Sheffield Wednesday last season. He's in that ilk. He's tall, he's built, he throws himself about. For the goal that he scored for Scotland the other night, he got himself in the right position. So I think he'll do fantastic down there, and I'm sure he'll be one of those players that we see in a couple of years goes for silly money, a bit like the boy, was it Marley Watkins, that just signed for Aston Villa for £33 million.
That was one of John Hughes' boys, yeah?
Yeah.
33 million?
33 million.
That's incredible. That is incredible. But John Hughes was talking about him when I interviewed him just a couple of months back, wasn't he? Marley Watkins.
Is either Marley...
Is that the same guy?
Striker.
33 million? Wow, need to check that out.
Brentford to Aston Villa, 33 million.
I thought Aston Villa were signing Edward for 35.
Ah, well.
We'll come back to that. So good luck, Simon Donnelly. I wish you all the best. You're the captain of Celtic Greats, and hopefully you can continue in that role, even though you are the assistant at Brecon City. There's a few other things to discuss, Colin, but let's get a look at some of the messages coming through on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Now, Red Scotland, who comments on a regular basis, welcome back to the show on YouTube. It's gone from 80% of the population are going to catch this with tens of thousands of deaths. I think that's a COVID. Yes. To hardly anybody is catching this, and there's hardly any deaths. Time to open the stadia. Time for normal. What is normal? This is what I was thinking about earlier when I was speaking about the things that we've done in the period where we've looked at lockdown. We've adapted. The normal's not going to be normal, is it?
No. And I seen Aberdeen posted a thing to the fans yesterday, basically giving them new regulations as to what to do when they get into the stadium. Masks to be worn at all time. Basically, no singing, no shouting. Clap and be happy and go home was the way I kind of read it. But I tell you what, see if it meant that I was one of those people inside the stadium to watch live football once again. I'll sit there with my mask on and I'll clap away. It's not much different than going to a home game at Celtic Park, to be perfectly honest.
Do you wear a mask at Celtic Park?
I think some people wear a scarf to keep warm.
Kevin Graham, welcome back, Kevin. We spoke to you on Monday and you'll be back next Monday as well. Has Paul the Tim got a Ross-shire postcode? Well, you know what? I like wee Paul.
He's a fantastic guy. Anytime I've had the chance to be in his company or that, he's brilliant. And do you know what? The fact that he's got a sort of Celtic celebrity
Is there anybody that's got more followers on Twitter? I mean, an individual Celtic
I don't know.
fan, not a celeb. Well, he sometimes gets called a celebrity when he appears, but
I don't understand the abuse that he gets.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. He's a good guy.
We'll all sit here and we'll all come up with our own suggestions as to how, one, he gets the time off to go to all these games, two, how he manages to afford it. But see, at the end of the day, if we're all being...
It's his life.
See, if we're being really perfectly honest, we're all a wee bit jealous.
It's his life. You know, he works hard for it. He travels the length and breadth of Europe to watch his club. Take my hat off to him. Good guy.
If you had the same chance, you would do the exact same thing.
But I did like that picture of him in a Ross County jersey.
It was hilarious.
Superb. Gary Doonan, local restrictions going to have a negative impact on Celtic Park? Absolutely, especially with the kind of regionalised lockdowns. And
yeah, I mean, we could go and have a political debate on this, but I think...
Why not? We like a bit of politics on this show.
I think it's ridiculous that we're actually looking at that when we're talking about 200 infections of 15,000 tests, and they're trying to compare it with 200 infections of 1,500 tests.
Did you get that from Ian Brown's Twitter page?
Was that a shameless plug there, Paul? Is Ian Brown the new sponsor?
No, not yet. Now, Damon Gallagher, good afternoon, boys, and good afternoon to you, Damon. You're commenting via YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe on there. We're pushing the YouTube figures up.
So close to 2,000.
2,000? Brilliant.
So close. Almost
doubled that just in a couple of weeks.
Incredible.
Tony Hutton, good to see you commenting via Twitter. What information shall 300 fans in stadiums give the government? 75 people in each of the four ends. That's a good point. I mean, I know it's just a very small kind of softly approach, but what are we going to gain from it? I think is a big question here.
I agree. I think 300's a ridiculous number. It should have been at least 2 or 3 times that. But when you look at maybe Ross County, I don't know what their capacity is. Is it like 8,000? Something like that. We're probably only going to get...
But where did they get that figure from if it is 8,000, you know?
I don't know, but I mean, we look at the likes of down south, they're talking about potentially only 25 to 30% of a stadium opening up. And they are probably ahead of us, despite the fact that our football's been back longer. That test game with Brighton and Chelsea, 2,500 just off the bat. Just throw 2,500 in. But with Scotland, it's 300 fans. I don't get that at all. I really don't. But, I mean, I guess it'll be a chance to look at procedures of getting in and out the stadium. There'll be enough hand sanitizer. What I'll be interested in is, will the kiosks be opened? Will they be able to go and buy a pie? Will they be able to...
Don't know.
So, I mean, Ross County, has to be said, fantastic food service up there.
I'm still not writing off Paul to Tim. I think he might get in. Now, Tony's questions reminded me of something. I'm not sure I've mentioned it on the postcode? No, the podcast. I'm not sure I've mentioned it on the podcast, so I'm going to mention it, right? But as many people know, I spent some of my formative years in a small village in Fife called High Valleyfield, famous for producing the likes of Bert Payton and George Conley and various other brilliant footballers. Of which I wasn't one, but John Potter did play for our team, and he's at Hibs now. But we trained, I think we were maybe under 12, 13, and the manager of our team was called Ian Downey. There is a point to this story, and Ian Downey's son played for Aberdeen, and Ian Downey's son was Ian Jr., and he played for Aberdeen, and he scored in the World Cup final in 1989. Ian Downey, ginger-haired boy, whippet, and we, about a week later after that game against Saudi Arabia, you won't remember it, but many of the under-16s team, Ian Downey scored. The Tango match ball, the Adidas Tango match ball, ended up in our bag of balls at High Valleyfield training. It was the match ball. High Valleyfield, I'll have that. So it was nicked. And we used it. We used it until all the panels and everything fell off. A World Cup final ball, we used it for training. True story.
Do you know, I remember things like that. I remember some of the times having to go to watch Morton at Capello, and it was when Iron Brew was a sponsor of the kind of lowland leagues, not the lowland leagues, the kind of lower leagues. Do you remember the Iron Brew football?
Yeah. That
they used? Bright orange round the sides with the thing in the middle. Capello is famous for balls getting booted over the stadium. And my girlfriend was seeing my sister was seeing a boy at the time who was a big Morton fan.
Did you start off by saying your girlfriend was seeing somebody?
That's terrible, isn't it? Sorry.
You slip.
I know. My sister was seeing someone at the time who was a big Morton fan.
Right.
And they had a dog, and used to take the dog out to behind where the back end of Capello, and at least once a week would come home with a match ball from the game that
Where are
weekend.
They? We could put some of them in the studio next door. We've got loads of memorabilia in there.
For 5s and 7s.
Terrible. Well, the World Cup final ball is no more. We used that until it was completely done. But that's how we rolled at High Valleyfield. Now, Gary Doonan, again, it's always great to see you getting involved, Gary, and we will organise for you to visit the studio very soon. Commenting on Facebook, Ross County well within rights to maximise, nobody holding a gun to anybody's head to pay it. Absolutely, and I hope it's a great success. I really hope it's a great success. But now that I've been talking about Sol, I wonder if it's Sol's platform, because we did speak about football events and music events.
I don't know. I know the production company is the same production company that Celtic use.
Right, is that Sunset
Vine? Because they've managed to get John Hartson on as part of the panel on Saturday. But I mean, Sol's right. There's an opportunity out there.
Yeah.
I remember. Do you remember East Stirlingshire had a player that was a international?
No,
I can't remember. He was a centre back, and I can't remember which country he played for.
Right,
but because he was an international, they launched a TV channel, Shire TV, and they sold subscriptions to the player's country.
Fair play.
There's an avenue out there, I believe.
It's the only reason we signed Kokai Mizuno, is it not?
What was it, Japan? Because we'd sold Naka?
Aye. Ken Walsh, welcome back, Ken. I hope you're well over in Ireland. Hello all, good to be back live. I think it's a step in the right direction. I know it's just a test game and everything else, and also it's good for us to be back live. We're doing it a wee bit differently today. We are aiming to try and get the best possible product that we can get on a Celtic State of Mind, and the camera setup is a wee bit different today, which hopefully will mean the cameras don't drop out, and hopefully will mean the actual sound quality does not get interference, echo, reverb, and everything else that the gremlins have been fighting us with over the last few weeks.
The only issue with that is you actually do have to listen to the nonsense that comes out our mouths.
You do, yes. Now, Van on YouTube, £15 appears to be a bit steep, but you really can't blame Ross County. The smaller clubs need to explore every avenue. I don't think there's been too much in the way of bad kind of reactions from Celtic fans.
No, see, when you look at it, right, £15, what are we paying as Celtic season ticket holders for our virtual season ticket? I mean, I know my season ticket was like £550. So if you work that out over 20 odd games, I'm paying over 20 odd pound. And I know there's families out there that have got 3 and 4 season tickets. So are they paying close to £100? At least with this, it's only a one-off payment of £15. Yeah, okay, £15 for a pay-per-view. It sounds pricey off the bat. But if you've got, say, let's limit this because there is a limit to how many people you can have inside. But if you have 8 people from 3 households in, then it works out about £2 a head. It's not too bad.
Now on Facebook we have just received a great wee comment. I do night shift. When I get up I watch the show every day. Superb. Fantastic. Great to have you on board. Keep coming back. We are broadcasting every weekday on the Bulletin. We then cover the games. We might take a day off. We might not.
Really?
At the weekend, who knows. But we do cover the games, pre-match, half-time, post-match, and we've got the ability now that if some big news happens, we can go live and start a discussion. And although we run with a particular debate or a particular question, Colin, you know, if you've got anything to say it. If you've got a question, ask it, and we'll cover it within reason. We'll also be covering things like the next game against Rangers. We're going to go live the day before, maybe at night time. We might do a nighttime show, you know, and actually get people involved that way. At the moment, we're not quite ready to hand the mic over and do the phone in. We're not quite ready to do that yet. I think it's working good the way it is.
I think Laurie at the moment. Denniston would be the first caller.
It's like doing the live gigs and you let that mic go into the crowd and it's it, game over. I normally ask people to tweet me the questions. And the other opportunity that we'll have, obviously, is Transfer Deadline Day. Colin, I think that will be quite a good show as well.
I'm really looking forward to Transfer Deadline Day. I love Transfer Deadline Day.
We'll be doing it live.
And it's not even for just the Celtic coverage, because usually in Scotland it can be a bit of a damp squib, but just to sort of break some of the news out there.
Should we send somebody to the park? We could do that.
I mean, if you're looking for a volunteer, I will happily go.
Let's do it. Right, you'll be
I think the best place maybe to go would be Lennoxtown.
You can dial it in.
Yeah.
There we go. Tam Mannion mentions on Facebook that Ross County are a club who have always been a great community club. They did good things throughout the lockdown. For their size, they did more than most. I applaud them. And I think that we're of the same view. We're looking at what they've done with this PPV and we think, well done. Yeah. You've got to make extra revenue. Fair play.
I really like Ross County as a team. Don't get me wrong, I hate to travel up there. It's a long day, and it's usually a 12:30 kickoff. And you've got to leave at the crack of dark. But as a club, for the area that they come from, is to be absolutely commended. I mean, I spoke to Paul Lawson, who has obviously spent a long time up there after he left Celtic.
Yeah.
And he can't speak any more highly of Ross County as a club. He loves the setup up there. They were great to him. They've had some fantastic times. So fair play to them. Do you know what I mean? You want to see more teams like that are punching above their weight than teams that are really should do a lot better for the resources that they've got.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. There's a comment coming in via Red Scotland on YouTube that resonates with me a wee bit, because it says, if it's not a game involving Celtic, I just can't watch football. Now, I'm not quite there yet, but my passion for football outside of Celtic has diminished massively in the last 25 years. There was a time where, like yourself, I would have watched anything football related. But a lot of these leagues, Colin, I just can't buy into them. I can't buy into the financial disparity, if you like. You know, there's clubs here who are popping up and all of a sudden they're a big club. I'm not going to name them. I've nothing against the clubs. And then all of a sudden there's a whole generation of fans who act as though the club are a big club. And I just look at it and I think it's broadcast money. It's a house of cards. It could collapse at any time. And the big argument, the Scottish game, rightly and wrongly, gets a hard time elsewhere, right? Because we do a lot of things wrong. Let's not beat about the bush here. I mean, at the very highest echelons, a Scottish game can sometimes be an absolute shambles, right? And I mean, we'll come back to Andrew Dallas being the ref on Saturday in a moment or two. But when you look at the Scottish game and the image that it has and the image that the brand has outside of Scotland, and in particular in England, right? And you hear a lot of the kind of flack that you get. My counter-allegation, counter-argument even, counter-allegation, that was last Monday at court when I turned up with my suit. No, that was something completely different. My counter-argument is people say Celtic coming down from the Scottish League, you wouldn't be in a Championship and all that. It's wafer thin. We'd have the same, budgeting complexities in terms of broadcasting deals. We would have the money would be there. It's not as if we would still be buying, Klamala and Sorrow if we were in the English League. But again, the argument is, if an English club came to Scotland, to be bust in 2 weeks.
See, for me,
if you're using that as a formula,
I
if you come to Scotland, the whole thing changes, and the same would be the same at Celtic if they go down to England.
But see, when you look at what constitutes a big club, and we speak about teams like Celtic and Rangers, now they've been a big club despite the lack of European success. They're known throughout the footballing world. You hear it when Celtic and Rangers are drawn against teams like Barcelona, against Bayern Munich, and you hear it from the players themselves that say they look forward to those ties, they look forward to coming to Scotland and to playing in front of the crowd. But I mean, you take a look down south, Leicester, when they won the Premiership, everybody was turning up with a Leicester jersey on. It's a thing at the moment. You'd never mention teams yourself, but I'll go ahead and mention them. Teams like Leipzig, that literally have bought their success over the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
Who'd heard of Leipzig before that?
Rangers. In the last 8 years.
There's a fad to these things. Look at the amount of LA Galaxy shirts that were sold when Beckham went over.
It's a fad, of course it is.
There's a fad to all this. The teams that are genuinely the big teams in Europe and across the world will always be the big teams, no matter how successful they are. And you remember a Bayern Munich, a Juventus, an AC Milan, a Lyon,
Ajax.
A Celtic, an Ajax, a Manchester United, a Liverpool. And see if it happens that Wolves go on and win the Premier League next season. You'll see loads of Wolves shirts.
I know. It's almost as if they're into the actual league.
Yeah.
I always call it WWF wrestling. There was this big thing about WWF wrestling, just a box office sport. Yeah. And it's very similar to that. And people bought into it, and it was just like this contrived entertainment.
Yeah.
The English league's like that, for me.
Manchester City are not a big club. They're not. See, before the money came into Manchester City, you've got to go back to sort of the late 60s before they were up and in around.
Mid-90s, they had Jerry Craney playing centre forward for them. There you go.
But when was the last time they'd won something?
No, that's what I mean. They had Jerry Craney playing centre forward. They won nothing.
So
you're absolutely right.
To me, Manchester City are a fad club. And if that money was to ever disappear, they would fall down the leagues.
No, you're 100% right, because they were falling down the leagues, The GAL 1980, Canadian Morton Supporters Clubs. These people will be few and far between. Now, when you were listing about clubs, you listed Celtic twice, and that goes back to the point that we were saying, having two Celtic teams within the pyramid structure in Scottish football. I love what Mark Miller's done. I really think that's fantastic. I would love to have him on the show to talk to him a wee bit more about it. But I think it would be even more of a success if you had a team playing in that structure with the green and white hoops on, a Celtic Colts side.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've almost discussed this to death, and you really hope that someone with the power within Scottish football is listening to what the fans want. Now, it sounds like a crazy idea, especially in Scotland, that fans' views might actually be a thing that is relevant, but if the fans have the demand for it and it's out there, it surely suggests to Scottish football and the people that are running Scottish football that if the demand's there, then it will follow to where it ends up. So if you bring a Celtic Colts team or a Rangers Colts team or an Aberdeen Colts team, whatever, into, even if they have to start in the Lowland League, the fans will go and they will support it because it's what they've been crying out for all these years.
Mm-hmm. Kevin Graham makes the point, Ben Yu, Raymond McStay and Stefan Bonds are on trial at Fleetwood Town. Stefan Bond, that was another player that John Barnes wasn't willing to take responsibility for when I spoke to him. And Tam Mannion, a big discussion on here recently has been loaning players out. Would loan players be allowed to play against the Colts? I think you'd need to allow that, wouldn't you? You wouldn't need to, but for it to be a success.
Alright, so if Celtic were to loan somebody to Clyde and Clyde played the Colts, yeah. I mean, see, when you look at the likes of Barcelona and Real Madrid, who have successful B teams in the pyramid system in Spain, they can only get to a certain level. They can't actually be promoted to La Liga. I think they can only go maybe as high as B1 or B2.
Yeah, yep.
So they actually can't even go into La Liga 2. So if that's the case, Celtic and Rangers Colts will never take the place of a team that should rightfully be in the Premiership. All they're doing is offering development for players and giving the likes of Arbroath and Brecon and teams like this the chance to earn a wee bit extra money that they can then reinvest in their club, develop their own youth system, or bring in a better quality of player, which will give them a better chance to bridge the gap between what is the Premier League and what is the lower leagues.
What you also get there, Colin, is you've got a Colts team, let's say, play for a whole season in a specific tier of the Scottish divisions and in the pyramid, and a few of the players are released at the end of the season. They have got an opportunity then, I would suggest, for the teams that they've been playing against to maybe get a contract with them. Mm-hmm. You know, they've seen them at close quarters, they've seen the boys playing. So the whole thing, in terms of developing young players, is, for me, it's a no-brainer.
See, when you take a look at the players that we released this summer, guys like Mark Hill, Kieran Divers, guys that were obviously not going to get into the first team, mm-hmm. but if they had loan spells out there, then they would get picked up. Perfect example of that is Robbie Dees. Robbie Dees was on loan at Alloa last season, mm-hmm. and formed quite a formidable partnership at the back. I covered it as part of the loan review every month, and he's going to sign a 3-year deal at Inverness Cali. Mm-hmm. So it obviously shows that if you're putting your talents out there on a weekly basis, someone will be watching you, and if the opportunity has to come that you have to leave Celtic and there's a team out there that's going to offer you the stability of a 3-year contract, especially with what's happening in the world right now, you're going to take it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, interestingly enough, Red Scotland mentions that the SPFL collectively owned TV company for all top Scottish divisions. All games covered and all revenues divided between all clubs, no more Sky, etc. Keep the revenues and TV rights within our game. Was it not an idea that Roger Mitchell had with regards to SPL?
TV.
Yeah, the TV at the time. And was he before his time? I know he gets a lot of stick on Twitter. He was quite good on a Celtic State of Mind, it's got to be said, a few months ago when he was a guest. I think there's a big risk that the SFA, I don't think, are good risk takers. In business, risk is good at times, you know, to make a step up in the right direction towards a better kind of landscape for Scottish football. I don't think the people in charge of Scottish football have got that risk-taking ability, Colin.
No, and they would probably look to partner with someone that's already been successful in that sort of system, subscription-based system, the likes of Amazon, Netflix, someone like that, where they can go on and kind of use that platform for it. I think SPFL TV isn't necessarily a bad idea. I think you would definitely get the subscribers that you need for it. And when you compare it with the TV deal that we've got at the minute, is it worse to go out and try it yourself than what it would be to take the money that we're getting off Sky, especially when you're saying it's 25-30 million pound a season compared to the hundreds of millions that English football's getting.
I know. The biggest issue I've got with that is when you look at the subscription base in Scotland, the money that Scottish football fans are investing in the packages that Sky offer, and then, you know, the game that we get is getting shortchanged. I think that's the biggest issue for me, because the investment of Scottish football fans in these platforms, be that Sky or previously BT, is huge.
When you take a look at the viewing figures for a Celtic Rangers game, you're talking close to 1 million people watching that game across the UK. Mm-hmm. Now, if the only way to get that was to subscribe to a £10 a month channel, you're talking 1 million people subscribing at £10 a month. It's a lot more valuable to the Scottish game than what the current TV deal is. We definitely get shortchanged up here, and although this is a record-breaking TV deal, we should be getting probably a lot more when you compare it with comparable leagues across Europe.
Now, Tony's back. Tony Hutton, good to see you back. Tony Oakley should have played it at High Valleyfield. Listen, I'd have loved to have taken that game to Valleyfield, and that might still happen when we're back to normal. And Tam Mannion tells us that Liam McGrandles is up at number 12 in the iTunes chat. See what happens when you mention somebody on ACSOM? It just propels them through the iTunes charts.
Got a job and stuff like that just from appearing on here as well.
I know, it's true. Ian Gibney, who is commenting on YouTube, the truth is there isn't the young players about anymore. I don't see any kick shouts or anything. All kids playing PS4, a lot less of a pool of youngsters kicking a ball. Now, we have a lot of youth coaches on this show. We've spoken to a lot over the last few months, and I think they would tend to disagree. And the issue with playing games and the changing in the times, that affects every nation. Unless you're talking some really underprivileged areas, maybe in South America, I get that. But right across the board, if you look at, how can English soccer still produce players? Because they've still got the same distractions that Scottish football have got.
To be honest, I think that, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, I think that argument's nonsense. What really puts off generations of kids going out and kicking a ball is going out and seeing no ball game signs, or seeing that the pitches that used to be free to play on, you've now got to pay towards. Mm-hmm. Now, I know, given a spoiler alert, we will be covering this later on, but there's a generation that we are pricing out of playing football. Do you know, for a local Sunday League team in the area that I'm from, it costs £13 per player to play a game. Mm. Now, £13 is okay if you're going to be playing 90 minutes of football. That's fine. But what about the guys that are sitting on the bench? The guys that don't get on? Why are they paying £13? There is an appetite to play football out there. If you go and look at kids in a school playground, they're wanting to kick a ball about, the opportunity for us to do that as a generation, and I count it myself still within that generation. I want to go and play 7-a-sides. I want to go and play 5-a-sides against my pals. But when you're talking about having to pay ridiculous amounts of money to use facilities which are not maintained and not invested upon, then it is going to take that people away from football. Look at, when you mentioned England there, Hackney Marshes is one of the biggest football grounds across the UK. There's something like 70-80 pitches there for Hackney Marshes, and from what I understand, it's relatively cheap to play on it.
It's got to be affordable. Colin, you've already put a wee spoiler in there, but what you were referring to is a different podcast we're going to be launching via A State of Mind called The Football Insomniac.
Yes.
Because football keeps you up at night, amongst other things. But that is going to be a podcast. That's going to be a topic of discussion, as is the Mark Miller scenario, as is the new Manchester United strip, which is potentially the worst kit I've ever seen. But that's coming up later on. Some great points coming in. First of all, Kevin Graham comments that after Mark Wilson being in the dressing room at the Celtic Greats game, I'm surprised he never hired Frank McGarvey. I love Frank, but he did play with 10 men one time that we were playing. And he did play with 3 left backs. He told 3 players they were playing at left back. So I'm not sure his management career will ever be rekindled.
To be fair, it's not dampened the performances of the Scottish national team having 3 left backs playing.
I know, but he actually thought we were all going to be playing in that position. Just a wee point note as well. It was actually Ollie Watkins who's been going for £33 million. Thank you, Agent Bolly Bombscare. I did think Marley Watkins was a wee bit more obscure than 33 million, but nothing surprises me with English football. That's why it almost seemed believable. So when we're looking at also there's loads of issues with regards to live streaming being online illegally. And that might be also something. But I did notice last season that Celtic seemed to have a good handle on that.
They definitely invested quite a lot of money in it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are trying to take down these streams when they can. I'm of the opinion that we do have to be, as we say, a club open to all. We're talking about games like a 3:00 kick-off on a Saturday where you've got 60,000 in Celtic Park.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't that be available to people that can't make the games? I mean, there's people out there who have to work, who would have been at games through their whole life, and they're now at their retirement age, and they maybe can't get to Celtic Park. They've moved their season ticket on to younger members of family. One of the biggest issues,
the big job thing as well, moving for your work, calling in, leaving Celtic behind. If you're moving, my dad had to work all over the place, after the miners' strike, and it was one of the things he didn't see Celtic for years as a result of that.
I mean, I've got a good friend over in Miami, Stephen, who's I know is going to be listening to this, because he told me he's recently now subscribed to all our platforms, and you can do so too on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. But he gets the chance to keep up with Celtic through Celtic TV. Mm-hmm. Now, just because he's in Miami, what does that make any difference to, say, my cousin that stays in Plymouth? This 3 o'clock rule that's in for UK football, that we can't broadcast a game at 3 o'clock, I think that's something, especially with the pandemic that's going on at the minute, that really needs to be reviewed going forward. And I don't see why, if we can still fill a stadium, why we can't put these 3 o'clock kickoffs out to the wider public, whether it be on a pay-per-view basis, whether it be on Celtic TV. It's not as if it's going to stop people from turning up, especially when we're going for 10 in a row.
Well, listen, Colin, I think the pandemic, you're going back again to an earlier podcast with David Lowe, everything's going to change. Things that previously were never going to happen, i.e. Celtic leaving Scottish football, is back on the table, because everything that's happened with COVID, it all comes down to financials. It all comes down to the survival of businesses, of leagues, and that everything's going to change over the next few years. I absolutely have no doubt whatsoever about that. Now, I'm going to go back to your point you were making about investment in football just in a moment. But Gary Doonan raises the point again. Ian Downey, good player in a squad with Paul Dickoff, Andy McLaren, Brian O'Neill, playing against Figo and Rui Costa and beating them. I was at the game that Gary's talking about at Tynecastle. I've mentioned that a few times as well. It's like you continually mentioning your Lazio trip.
I think you mentioned it more than me now.
I was at the semi-final with the Under-16 World Cup, and we won 1-0, and Brian O'Neill scored that goal. But in that team was also Jim Beattie, and Jim Beattie at the time was with Celtic. He went on to have a career at St Mirren. He has, been hit with MND in recent months, so thoughts and prayers with Jim Beattie, who's fighting the fight of his life with a horrible, horrible illness. So all the best to Jim and his family as he's fighting motor neuron disease, because I know, obviously, as well as Jimmy Johnson, there was someone close to the Greenock CSC who recently passed with that horrible disease. Now, going back to your investment, I may or may not have mentioned this on the pod, but we're going out to a much wider audience now that we're on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. So I'm going to tell you again, having spoken to Jock Brown a few years ago, the interview unfortunately wasn't broadcastable because the audio quality wasn't great, and I'm a bit of a stickler for that. I might transcribe it at some point for the website. He spoke about Craig Brown, 1998, famously the last time the Scottish national team reached a major finals of any tournament, and after that we had £54 million, right? And that was investment, it was funding. You got a lot of lottery funding, it was prize money. You make a lot of money if you get to the World Cup finals, and this was all clubbed together, £54 million. What do you do with it? What do you do with it? Well, Craig Brown had a great idea. It's a great link, actually, because Craig Brown was the manager of that 1989 World Cup final team, the under-16 team. So he had a great idea, and his idea was to invest that in youth football. And the way he wanted to do it was look at Scotland and look at all the different regions and make sure there was enough facilities that could be used free by kids wanting to play football. And I think at that time, what was mooted was 50 brand new pitches that were going to be built to allow kids to play football, right? What did the SFA do with the money? They pumped it into Hampden, into office space, into regenerating Hampden Park. And what's happened since then? Scottish football's never kicked a ball in the finals, right? That is important to point that out, because Craig Brown, again, we can't argue with his record for Scotland. He got us to the finals, Colin. He had that foresight, but the SFA didn't. Brian McClare has got some brilliant foresight, but he couldn't work with the SFA. There's a trend. So we're really up against it, whilst the people who are working out at Hampden are still there. We really are, in order to improve anything in Scottish football.
Well, when you take a look at, I think it was maybe only 5 or 6 years ago, when Barry Hearn, who's the head of many I mean, he's turned round the fortunes of darts and of snooker, and his son Eddie is the best meme that's on Twitter at the minute, as well as being a fantastic boxing promoter. They are guys that can see beyond where a sport is at that particular point in time. They had the revolutionary ideas to bring it forward, and the SFA thought that it was ludicrous and that their ideas would never take off the ground, despite the fact that they've turned around a sport like snooker, so that when you win what was just recently the World Championships, Ronnie O'Sullivan, he got nearly £1 million for winning that trophy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can get that sort of money, there's not a snooker tournament that doesn't have a sponsor. There's not a darts tournament that isn't on TV.
Yep.
And yet we go in to one of the biggest seasons in Scottish football, where eyes are going to be paid and so much attention to whether Celtic are going to make history or whether somebody's going to stop them. The league doesn't have a sponsor. The League Cup only just got renewed with Betfred. The Scottish Cup doesn't have a sponsor, and the lower leagues don't have a sponsor. That's lost revenue for the game.
And who's responsible?
It is the people that we keep going on
it's
about.
It's the Blazerati.
They don't listen.
I know. They don't. They're completely out of touch. And that's the reason why, and I've said it before and I've said it again, they're never going to change, Colin. Celtic need to get out of Scottish football. It's another podcast entirely, but in order for us to progress and become a European force and dine out at that top table again, season on season, we'll never do it in Scotland. We'll never do it in Scottish football. The Scottish football highest echelons were not to blame for Celtic getting knocked out of Europe this season. We've done a podcast on that. I'm talking about the biggest, the wider picture. The wider picture is Celtic need to get out of Scottish football. But let's talk about that. We'll talk about that on another podcast. Any other points to discuss? Well, I've seen Paddy Roberts being mentioned again on Celtic Stories. I also read that Aidan McGeady would fancy a move back. I think Aidan McGeady should go to Hibs.
I thought that was the link, wasn't it? Aidan McGeady to Hibs. I think he said he'd walk to Celtic, but I think there's many players when they get to that stage of their career would walk to Celtic because it's a dream move for so many people. Can I just hold you for a moment? Richard Murray, Celtic are going nowhere. Infantile debate. Absolutely, completely disagree with you. We've spoken to a number of experts over the last couple of months in relation to cross-border movements, and the rules and regulations pre-COVID will undoubtedly be different post-COVID. So it's not infantile. And with regards to anybody who bemoans Scottish talent not coming through, or bemoans the SFA, or looks at Celtic getting bounced out of qualifiers season on season on season, that is a debate, because it's the only way it's going to change. And the thing is, it's not a debate of it's going to happen within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It may take 15, 20 years for it to happen, but just take a look at the Belgian and is it the Belgian and Holland, the Dutch league, where they're looking at an amalgamation of the two leagues. Benelux, aye. So there's trials that are going to be out there. I don't rule it out. I mean, Welsh teams playing the English Premiership. So if the avenue's out there, I still think an Atlantic League's going to be an option. Yep. Where that's a more likely option in terms of can't transfer associations end of. No, it's not the end of. It's not the end of, Richard, because you're talking about a situation pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. There's going to be leagues that will be absolutely ravaged, and it might not happen immediately, but it's going to be the same with a lot of businesses. It will take some time for it to hit. There's going to be teams and leagues ravaged after this pandemic. And I mean, do some research on the Welsh club. Yeah, we know, we've already spoken at length with David Lowe, who actually bought a football club to test the water, that football club being Clydebank. We know why Welsh clubs play in the English League. We know why Berwick Rangers play out with their jurisdiction. We know all of this. But what we're now looking at is a complete turnaround in events, and afterwards there will be opportunities for clubs from various countries to talk about a transatlantic league. The last time Celtic had serious thoughts about moving out of Scotland was in 1998, where Fergus McCann tried to buy Wimbledon Football Club. So Richard, we've done loads of research on this over a period
said in months on the podcast, it's not an infantile debate. We're totally aware of all the restrictions. And when, for example, you're talking to people who are involved in the discussions for a transatlantic league, when you're speaking to people who were not only financial advisors but lawyers of Fergus McCann, when you're talking about people who actually bought football clubs to use them as Trojan horses and test the water, we've done the research, believe me. And the only way that Celtic Football Club will really be able to move forward in a big way and, as I say, dine out at the top table is outside the constructs of Scottish football.
But I mean, it's fantastic that we've got this platform right here to discuss ideas and for people to give their input. So, I mean, Richard, we're not having a go at you. We're saying this is great debate. I mean, you've got your view, Paul's got his view. This is what this platform's for. We want to have fan interaction. So thanks for getting involved. And we see your side of the story, we see our side of the story. We don't agree on it, but that's just the way things go.
Now, the big thing with regards to the point we were making there before is... with regards to Aidan McGeady, is there's plenty of people who would walk a million miles to watch or play for Celtic, Colin. But
is that another song
reference? He's not a player that I think would enhance the Celtic squad. I do think, going back to Paddy Roberts, I do think Paddy would.
I hate this with Paddy Roberts because I love the player. I think he's absolutely fantastic, and every time that his name gets mentioned to Celtic, it puts a massive smile on my face because he is one of those players who I think was very well described by Hugh Keevins as one of the players that you go and pay money to see because you don't know what he's going to do next. He's one of the players that gets you up off your seat, applauding what he can do. Yes, he's not done it at other clubs, but there's plenty of other players out there that don't do it at other clubs. There's players that are set up for a way that a club plays, and Paddy Roberts was definitely set up for the way that Celtic play.
Why is there so much kind of like resignment when somebody mentions Paddy Roberts? If we're looking for a wide player who can play right or left, right, who, as you say, goal return's great, his delivery is great, he can take on players, he's creative, he's done it at the highest level, right? For Celtic, he's done it in the Champions League against Man City, his parent club. Why do people just think, not the Paddy Roberts thing again? I mean, I think he would enhance Celtic's squad.
I know certain people that believe that Mikey Johnson's a better player than Paddy Roberts, and I can't agree with that. I think Mikey Johnson's still got a lot to prove as a Celtic player. Mm-hmm. I think you see the way that Johnson was last season, and Lennon told him in no certain terms how he felt about him at times. I'm not saying that he's not a talented player. I think Mikey Johnson is a talented player, but I don't think he has the attributes that Paddy Roberts has.
I mean, going back to Richard, tell me, Richard, is that Cathkin Park on your profile picture? It looks like the old terrace in there. And your comment on YouTube, Richard thinks he'd be perfect, terrific player that will enhance us. I think we need somebody who could probably play both sides. Mm-hmm. Now, James Forrest can do it. Mm-hmm. I think he's been very effective on the left when he's moved out there. We are waiting on Mikey Johnson coming back. My biggest concern about Johnson, and I've mentioned this, I think physically he needs to bulk up. He needs to bulk up. He definitely does. You've seen it with Christie. He went to Aberdeen. I think he came back 1.5 stone lighter. He's obviously not been on the State of Mind diet, right? No, heavier. 1.5 stone heavier, but it was pure muscle.
Well, this goes back to another point that we've made over and over again on this podcast. The way that we lose talented players out of Scottish football is because we have a mindset of what a player has to be. Now, we've just fell into that trap. We've literally just says, Mikey Johnson, fantastic player, quality, got all the ability in the world, but he's not strong enough.
But I think his injuries would maybe suggest that physically he needs to bulk up. He needs to... Here's a question for you. Put Mikey Johnson in front of Kieran Tierney in that Arsenal team. Does he get a game? I'm talking left side, midfield, forward. Does he get a game? No chance. No chance. No with that stature, no with that build, he wouldn't survive in the English league. Mm-hmm. Again, happy to debate with anybody who disagrees with me on that one, Colin. I just think that if you want to take it to that next level, you look at the way Callum McGregor even has built up, and completely his whole shape, his whole body shape has changed over the years.
It's the same when we spoke about Patrick Klimala. when he came back for pre-season, I think Kevin Graham called him a UFC fighter, the way that he bulked up and he shaved his head. And
Kevin called him an ultra, a Legia Warsaw ultra. Yeah. Right. Richard, it's an absolute pleasure to have you getting involved in the show. What I would say is go and have a wee listen to the David Lowe and the Paul Smith podcasts. Also, I think there was another one we did. Roger Mitchell touches on the cross-border aspect. We've interviewed David a couple of times. Have a listen to them. It may not be something that's off the table, but you're telling us that you saw Paddy playing at Girona and he wasn't the same player, but I think coming back could get him firing again. There's certain players who just they just match, they click with clubs.
Yeah,
they click with clubs, you know, and it does happen. They feel comfortable with a certain club. Paddy Roberts, I'd have him back every day of the week. How much of an investment would it take to bring him back? That's the thing. I mean,
I don't think it would take a lot.
What are you talking, 5 million?
I don't even know if it would be that.
Really?
Just because of the failure of his loan spells that he's been out there so far. I mean, what was it that Man City paid? Was it sort of 10 million to film when he was 17, 18? I know he's got 2 years left on his deal, but if you're a player out there, he must return to Man City's training ground every year and go, what one's my locker?
What is he now, 24 did you say?
No, I don't even think he's that. He's 22 maybe.
Right.
22, maybe 23, I don't know.
Yeah, he broke in the scene very, very young with Fulham, didn't he?
Yeah.
I would have him back, and people might think I'm lacking a wee bit in the ideas factory, but I just think we know what he can do.
But that has been the strategy of Celtic this season.
Can he play left back? That used to be, seriously, that used to be one of the things, can he play left back? And we're back there again. And it's a discussion I think we'll have maybe next week in relation to that. Do we buy another left back, Colin, or do we already have another left back if we can forgive what he has done?
Well, it looks as if he's going to be moving on, doesn't it?
Roma
is the...
Is that real?
I don't know. But I mean, he'd be in the same league as his cousin, so I'm sure he'd be delighted with that. If that's the case and we get our money back for him, it's almost like having a shirt that you get from your auntie or your uncle at Christmas and you hope that they've kept the receipt. He's gone. If he goes, farewell.
Right, okay. We move into 5 tournaments that were in this season, Colin. This is just something for you to think about before we finish up for the day. And we're down to one left back. That one left back being Bolingoli. And we're coming up against, let's say, Rangers, or we're going to be playing in a final, one of the tournaments that we're in, or we're going to be playing a big European game that we need to win to get into the next stages of the Europa League. You've got one left back. You want to play 4 at the back. Do you play Bolingoli? Serious question. Let's go 2-3 months down the line here. It's a serious question. Do you play him, or do you completely change formation, or do you play someone out of position, or do you play an untested youngster?
It's a difficult question. I don't remember specifically a player that's ever been in the position that Bolingoli's been in, where he's caused the club harm, and yet he's still at the club. Now, if I go back, guys that were outcast while still at the club, you're talking guys like Bobo Balde, probably guys from round about the early Martin O'Neill era.
Balde came back in.
Exactly.
Because these people are assets.
But was the fan reaction to Balde as bad as the way that...
It was a glorious reaction. We wanted them back.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the thing is, we're actually in a situation where you're not going to be thrown into that baptism of fire of 60,000 fans at Celtic Park for the foreseeable. If he was to come back, we'd discuss it on here. There'd be some gnashing of teeth. There would be Twitter debate. But very quickly, I believe we would be talking about the player. Is he good enough? We would not be speaking about whether he should play.
We'd be talking about the amount of balls that he gives away. He's not a great player, right? There is some ability there. There has to be for the fact that Roma's interested in him. Right,
he's not a great player. Remember everybody was changing their name to Bolingoli on Twitter. What was that about?
I think the joke went over.
Was it kind of like a cult thing?
It was.
Right, okay.
And that's fine. There's still some people out there
that still got it.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm just saying it may be a situation this season where you either play the boy or you play somebody out of position, change your formation, or play an untested youngster, and it could be such a big game. You've already heard when Lennon's speaking about it, he softened a fair bit in his last interview about when he was asked the question.
So I'll put it to you as the last point. You're a Celtic player. You're in that dressing room. You know what he's done and the effects that it's had on you as a player, and what it's had on the club as in the season that we are going through right now. What does it take for you as a player in that dressing room to forgive, not to forget, but to forgive what he has done and to move on as part of a squad? What has he got to do?
He needs to call. He needs to take the call when he's required. And what I mean by that is, it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good. If we're in a situation where we need a left back and he's the only one you've got, and he slots in there and we get through, job done. That would be job done. It's the bigger picture, Colin. I want to win the 5 tournaments we're in this season. If we win 4, I'll be happy with that. If we win 3, great. But in order to do that, you need that squad. And at the moment, we've only got one left back, and we could maybe play somebody out of position, but I don't agree with that. We've tried it before with Callum McGregor.
All I can hope, and I believe it is the case because we've seen the deal for Mitchell Bakker kind of progressing. Lennon knows what his priorities are. When he's seen what he needs this season, he's went out and he's got it. If it means that Bolingoli has to move on before we get a left back in, put him on the first flight to Roma, see you later, let's go on, let's concentrate on players that want to be here than want to play for the team.
You said that was the last point, and it would have been, but Stephen Arbuckle has just thrown a wee grenade in, and I like this, right? He's saying that Boyata managed to survive a similar but not as intense supporter backlash. Great point, Stephen, right? We're going through the qualifiers. We're up against AEK Athens. Anybody who's watching this podcast on YouTube, Facebook or Twitter who actually thinks that AEK Athens were a better side than that Celtic side, please let me know, because I don't think they were. However, they knocked us out, and a lot of that was to do with the pre-match shenanigans, right? We basically had a player who went on strike in Boyata. The Green Brigade had the banners out. Nobody argued with that because we all felt the same, that he let us down, right? He came back into the team. He was forgiven, he performed well, he finished off the season, and he left. Now, was it harmful what he done? Absolutely. Had he actually played against AEK Athens, was there a good chance we'd have got through? Yes. A very, very good chance we'd have been playing Champions League football. So he damaged the club, yet he still came back in because it was for the greater good. I think the same thing, maybe, listen, Bolingoli might sign for Roma tomorrow, or Romford. I don't know which team it is that's in for him. He might sign for one of them, right? And if he does, the argument's finished. But I think Celtic are being very, very clever, and Neil Lennon was very clever in the interview when he was asked the question, would the players allow him back in? Aye, I think they would.
And do you know what? That's probably one to ponder, because if you give an answer now, the same way that you would have given an answer to the Boyata scenario at the time, as you just said, the Green Brigade came out with the banners, nobody disagreed with it. But as the season went on, people changed their opinions.
He'd done a job, and it's a successful season.
The answer's probably not to be given now. Let's wait till October 5th when that transfer window closes and we see what we've got left of the squad. And if he's still there, the same way that Tom Rogic will still be there. You
want to get these splinters at your backside, mate? Listen, I would play him. That I'm going to be bold. I would play him for the greater good of the club. If he's needed.
What I'm saying is, if he's still there on October 5th, the same way that any player that wants to leave the club is still there on October 5th, Neil Lennon obviously believes that he's got a part to play this season. Right. Now, Kevin Graham pointed out that Braithwaite played for Lazio, and that was a big surprise to him, so don't be surprised if Bolingoli signs for Roma. But Stephen T on YouTube does point out that Braithwaite played in a World Cup final. So, and he gave the ball away for the goal. It doesn't surprise me. But thank you, everybody who's got involved. Thank you for all our new listeners. Thank you to Richard for disagreeing with us. That's what we want. We want people to come on, debate, throw in a grenade, get involved.
This is growing. We're doing it every single day at 12:30 weekdays, and Colin will be with us on a Wednesday. We're going to go away now and work on a different podcast that will be streamed live also, that is looking at the wider football world, and we've got a few things to discuss on that. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Colin Watt for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Take care, guys.